All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Yomi, Mesachas Rosh Hashanah. Amud Aleph. We also have Amud Aleph. Yeah. So we did a couple lines down. We were discussing Rosh Hashanah when it comes to Maestros. And the question really is as to when is something considered to be, which seed, when did it grow? Is it then? Is it after when it begins to grow, when it's planted, when it's harvested, right? So one of the cases we said when it grew to be a third, and we learned it out from the pasuk that was brought, which we'll soon reject coming up. We brought a pasuk where it calls it Sukkos, right? After Shemitah, Sukkos of this. It was after the 7th year. It was Sukkos of Shemitah. So what do you mean Sukkos of Shemitah? That's not the Sukkos of 7th year. That's Sukkos of, it's the 8th year already, right? So he said no, because it grew before Rosh Hashanah during Shemitah, and you harvested it on Sukkos. And since you harvested on Sukkos, it was ready to be harvested. It must have already been a third grown by the time when you harvested it, 2 weeks later. So that was what the Gemara said. So Amar Le, Rabbi Yirmiyah. So last words of the line, 3, 6, 7 lines from the top of Yer Gimel Amar Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. The Kilu Rabbanan bein shlish tavachas shlish. What? So the Rabbanan, they were certain, they knew exactly what it was, whether it was something was grown to be a third, or if it was less, it was only a quarter or a fifth or whatever.
Same thing with Shabbos. So if you cook before Shabbos, you cook more than a third.
We say it's right. So Gemara says, so right? Did I already tell you, right? Don't start to stick in your nose, right? The halacha knows when there's a halacha, there's a halacha. This is a standard, right? Kol midos chachamim kenu. Any meat of chachamim, this is how it is. They have to set. This is the cutoff, right? Arba'im saw who taivel. 40 saw a person can be taivel in a mikvah. Arba'im saw chasakurta v'ino yochel litval. If it's 40 minus, a kurta of a couple ounces, right? Then that's it. You can't be taivel. One in your tahor, the other is still tame, right? There's a standard. Kabetza matame. Tumas eichlin. It has to be the size of an egg for tumas eichlin. But if it's a beitza lacking a small tiny sesame or a small amount, then it's not. And 3 by 3 is for a medris, something to sit on. But if it's missing one thread, it's 3 by 3 minus the thread. Medris.
You can actually calculate.
Right. I hear. Okay, fine, good. Yeah, that as a standard. Even though it's very difficult to measure the water, but you can't measure it. It is measurable.
They didn't have the tools that we have now.
Right.
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's subject to subject. Sure.
I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah. So lav milsi damri. Really, and also you're right. It's not a good question. The boy mine chavra mirav kahana, because they want to ask Rav Kahana. Omer shekriva Yisrael. The knisasan la'eretz mehechan hekrivu. So when they first came to Eretz Yisrael, in the days of Yeshua, so they came over on the 10th of Nisan. They came over, and 6 days later, right? The carbon over was makriv, right? Or 5 days later, the fivefold. After the 10th, it was 5 days or after that to grow. So how do they go ahead and offer the omer, the barley, in order to go ahead and be offered? If you say that it was grown in the hands of Nachri, it's before they came in to sell, and that's when it was grown. We learned for the pasuk it has to be your katsira, right? And not katsira of a Nachri. As the Gemara says, maybe who said they offered? Maybe they didn't offer at all. So the Gemara says, no, you can't even think that way. The pasuk says, right? It says over there, and so the pasuk says over there, and in Sefer Yeshua it says, and they ate from the produce of the land, right? Right? It says, no, it's from before Pesach, they didn't eat it. Only after Pesach they ate it. And why is that? It's because they offer the Yomer. Right? So once again, back to the question. So from where did they get this product to go ahead and offer it? So Right? So he said maybe anything that did not become a third. In other words, it was not a third when it began to grow, when it was planted and all that. That was done before they entered into itself. That was done by the Nachrim that was there before. Then the Jews came to conquer. They came in on the 10th, and then it became in their hands. I have a deal of Kilu, right? Maybe you're going to say, oh, well, maybe it was more than a third, and they didn't realize it, or less than a third. Ella Kilu. Rather, they were certain. They were certain there that it was less than a third, and by the time they offered it, right, so it became a third, right? It was already a third ripened once it was in the hands of the Jews. So it's over here now. The Rabbanan are certain as to what is a third and what is not. So it says, cloud. Maybe it didn't grow at all before. But maybe over there it didn't grow there at all. And that's how they were certain, it's not a third because it didn't grow at all. But maybe if it grew a quarter, so they weren't sure whether it was a third or not. It was close, and therefore they couldn't really, I don't know, right? Because no. The pasuk says, it says they came up in the 10th. And if you say they didn't grow at all, can it grow in 5 days? So Elamai, what are you going to say? So, or Danko, where are you going to say, okay, so it began to grow. It was maybe a quarter or 6. So, but can you say that it was a quarter or 6, and all of a sudden it grew to a full, and it was ready, it was ripened, it was ready to be offered? Right? You're going to say that. What are you going to say? Eretz Tzvi Kasiv. The pasuk says, right, the land of Israel is Eretz Tzvi, right? It's a land of like a deer. Right? In other words, it's fast. He's here. So he's saying it grew fast. Therefore, once it's even though it grew a little bit, then it matured, it ripened quickly. So too, it could be ripened from 0 to 60. It also ripened completely. So therefore, there's no proof there. You can't say anything. You can say it was miraculously it grew from a quarter to full. You can say it grew from 0 to full, and therefore there's no proof.
Is that like a thing? Deers grow quicker?
No, but they're fast animals. Right. Tzvi is a deer, right? So they're fast. So it's a land. It's a fast land. What do you mean it's a fast land? It means it can grow its produce very quickly. So So Maskiva Rav Chanina says, ask Rabbi Chanina, Mimatzi Samarta the high Asif Kasiru. So we said earlier, what was the proof? Right? The proof we brought yesterday at the end of the day was that they called Sukkos, right? It was they gathered it, right? They did the harvest, they harvested it. And so what are they harvesting? They're harvesting things that grew in the previous year, and they're harvesting it now, and it was called Shemitah. So you see that since it grew during the Shemitah year, and even though it was harvested afterwards, it's count at the time of when it grew, which was at least a third. The pasuk says, V'yaspecha, Nigarncha, Mikvecha. We learned from there. It says over there, those things that come from the when you gather, right, from the garden, from the threshing floor, and also from the winery, from the wine vat, right, all those little pseiles, all those things that fall off, which we use for schach. It's talking about the things that fall off, right, that come from the threshing floor and those things that we use, that is like what we learn out to be for schach. So too over here, maybe over here where it says be'aspecha isn't in terms of gathering chag asif, maybe it's referring to that is the schach. It's not telling you they actually harvested it, right? Maybe it's telling you that they gathered and that which is used for sukkahs. So Amar Rab Zera Hamil said Hadi Biyadan. So says Rab Zera, actually we had a good proof. The also Rab Chanina's kasha. Right? He put an accent to it, right? He put an accent to our proof. Our proof was, it says they harvested. It must be the harvested stuff that grew before it grew a third. Says no, who said it was talking about harvesting? Maybe it just means that the gathering the stuff that's used for sukkahs, right? It's the gather, it's not a harvest, right? And he came and he said, so that's back to the drawing board. How do we know a third? In the Bryce says Rabbi Yonis ben Yosef, he says a tfuah l'shloish hashanim. You can go ahead and the tfuah will be for 3 years, right? The question was, they asked, hey, how are we going to eat? The Shemitah, what's going on here, right? So they didn't say, okay, we're going to have a large campaign and we're going to collect from money from all over the world, right? And to support you. Rather, right, the pasuk over there says that the produce you'll have will be support for 3 years. So I'll turn the page. I'll tikri l'shalosh el l'shlish. Rather, don't learn from there that l'shalosh means for 3 years. Rather means that it was it's a hint to a third of the crop l'shlish. In other words, when things are grow to a shlish, that is when it's considered to be ripe, and that's considered to be the year that it grew. Versus all right. We need it for itself, right? The pasuk over there was saying that when the Jews said, okay, if we leave the land empty, right, how are we going to go ahead and eat it? You're going to eat it for 3 years, right? You're going to eat it from the year before, you'll have for 3 years. So, but you need for the pshat of the pasuk. So when I said no, so krachrina, there's another pasuk. It says, "V'zaratem es hashana hashminis v'chaltem etfu yoshan ad hashana tishis." So it says over there that you will go ahead and you will plant in the 8th year and you'll eat from there, right, until the 9th year. So, but we learn over there that they already talked about from the 6th year. So therefore, that it will last up until that until the 8th year crops have grown. Therefore, we already know they'll be for 3 years. So therefore, since it's a repetitive pasuk, you can say instead of saying l'shalosh shanim, it's l'shlish. Tanan hasam. So we learn over there ha'ayres and shvis ha'ayres, right? Like rice, right? The hadoichen, right? Millet or quinoa. Hapargin, shumshin, and poppy, and poppy seeds, and the sesame. If they took root or took root, right, before Rosh Hashanah, root. Yeah. Sadly, it's the one thing I changed. I actually want to go back.
It only applies to tree
roots. So if you took root before Rosh Hashanah, misas the shavar, then it's considered to be meiser for the year before. Let's say the 6th year. But mutar b'shvis, and therefore it's mutar b'shvis because it already took root before the shmita, and it's not considered to be shmita produce, right? V'im lab, and if not, asher b'shvis, then it's asher b'shvis because it's considered if it didn't take root, then it's considered to be part of the next year, which is the 7th year. Misas in the shana, haba, right? And then, if not, then it would be considered to be mice. Would be considered to be for the following year. So, in other words, according to this, these items, right, the rice and the similar, right, and the sesame and the poppy and the millet, right. So those items are things that if it goes not when it grows a third, right, it goes by when it takes root into the ground. And Amar Rabbanan, Elon, so says the Rabbanan, Elon Basar Chanata. When it comes to a tree, it's when they go ahead and they blossom, right? When the fruit begins to come out, that's the judgment that that's considered to be the year is grown, right? Elon basar chanata. Tevuah v'zeisim, when it comes to the grains and the olives, basar shlish, it goes after a third growth. And yerek vegetables, basar likita, when it's harvested, when it's plucked. So hani kaman shavina rabbanim. So what are these going like, right? The rice and so forth. Which category do these fall in? So Adam Arava Mitachshasin Prachim Prachim. Since people go in the fields and they often just take some and they roll them and they eat them, or they're taken at different times. So therefore, since they're going during different times, sometimes it will be before Rosh Hashanah, sometimes after Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, to make it all even, therefore they say, you know what? It goes after when it takes to root. It took. It's taken, right? It begins to grow before Rosh Hashanah, even though it's not the beginning of the shlish and it's not fully harvested. Nevertheless, so therefore we want to have a zman where the entire field is all on the same playing field, right? And therefore we say basar hashrasha after when they take root. So Abaye says, well, I have a better idea. Why don't you say, right? Why don't you go ahead and make piles in the garden, even though you're not harvesting all together? You harvest and you put it together. But nimsa Torah mina chadash, sheba chadash, and sheba mina yashim, sheba. Excuse me. Torah mina chadash, sheba ala chadash sheba, and mina yashin sheba ala yashin sheba. Why don't you just go ahead and put it in a big pile? And even though some of the stuff that you took before, right, you took before Rosh Hashanah, and some of the stuff you took after Rosh Hashanah. But if you put it all together in a huge pile, so you'll say that what you take Meiser for, so the old covers the old and the new covers the new, right? It's all evenly spread out, right? So Mila Time to Rabbi Yasi ben Kibar Amar Mishum Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. This is going to be the opinion which we're going to describe soon as the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. Pul hamitzri, right? These types of beans, these Egyptian beans, pul hamitzri, shezaru. What? No, not big, right? So pul hamitzri, right? Shezaru. Once they begin lezer miktaso, miktaso eshli lifnei Rosh Hashanah, miktaso eshli lachar Rosh Hashanah. One over here. So this type of bean. So if some of it took root before Rosh Hashanah and some of it took root after Rosh Hashanah, ein term ma'asim izel zeh. Right, because some of it took root before, some of it took root after. We don't know when it took root. So what do you do over there? So so what should you do? Go ahead and take what when you after it grows, put it all together. Over there, because since when we don't know exactly it took root, so therefore put it all together, put it on the threshing floor, and then when you go ahead and take it, we'll say even some of the stuff that grew before I wanted to hold at the time. This man is when it took roots, right? So they took root before. So therefore, if you have 20% of it took root before and 8% took root after, so that was you took meiser for it. So that the 20% of the meiser covered the 20% from before, and it was evenly proportioned. He holds this concept of bila, right? As soon as the concept of bila, that the yesh bila, right? It's evenly proportioned. We can assume it's all together as one, and therefore, when I take the meiser, the 1/10, it's the same proportion of the meiser I took as to what the pile I took it from. That's the opinion of Shimon Shazuri.
The opposite of yesh brera.
I mean, it's not opposite, but we'll soon see. It's right, yeah, right. So so he said there. So he said, you want to solve our problem, right? Using the sheet of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, right? Who says, just put it all together, and it's the same proportion of the meiser you're taking as the proportion from before. So Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, he holds that it is evenly distributed, right? But the Rabbanan hold opposite. And Rabbi Yitzhak bar Nachmani, Rabbi Shmuel says halach Rabbi Yosef and Kiva Sham Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. The halach is Rabbi Yosef and Kiva. She said the name is Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. That you can go ahead and you gather it, right? Or you can gather it, you can put it all together, and then take the meiser. We assume it's the same proportion.
That's all by mitzri or by adoption, that kind of stuff.
Right. So it would be. It was said over there. He said it by pola mitzri. Right, we'll soon see. Very good. And Mask Rabbi Zeira, Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi, did Shmuel say Amar Shmuel La Kol Ein Bila Chutz Miyayin V'Shem. When it comes to bila, there is no bila except for wine and oil, right? Which items have to be are liquids, right? Liquids that comes evenly distributed. So he said no. Ishtami to say Had Amar Shmuel, you forgot something else of Shmuel. It's the third statement. Hakol Hoylech Achar Gemar Pri. Really, Shmuel held that it goes after the Gemar Pri, when it's considered to be finished. Now, it's when it's considered to be finished, that is the time of when it's now, of the year that it goes by the Meiser. So not when it begins to take root, right? Not when it grows a third. Not once it becomes a Gemar Pri, that's when it is. So in other words, even though you went ahead and you made piles, right? He would agree with the halacha, right? You made piles, but not because of that it took root before and some are before and some are after, but it's proportion. He's saying because, right, the entire field really, right, the field really becomes a pre at the same time. So since they all became a pre right afterwards, even though they took root, some took root before, some took root, during and afterwards, doesn't make a difference, right? Since they all became a pre afterwards, they're all considered to be the same year, the same growth year for Trumas and Meisos, and therefore it's no problem. So we say, Utsricha. Now we need all three of these statements, right? And Rashi says, right, Tzricha Hani Talas to Shmuel, Halacha Rav Shimon Shazuri, Halacha like Rav Shimon Shazuri, we said in the case of Pola Mitzri, right? Over there, Pola Mitzri, that what do? Yeah, you gather, even though some grew a third before, and some grew a third afterwards. You can put them all together on the same floor and harvest it together. It's considered proportional. And also, Ulakol Ein Bila, and it's also there is no Bila, right? Similar to the Rabbanan, except we'll soon see, except for the case of Yain Shemen, and Akol Holek Acher Gemar Pri. And also, when it comes to these types of plants, right, that are basically not all harvested as one, right? So those items we say it goes after the completion of the pre when they consider to be grown. And now we need other statements. So tzricha. If we hold halachas, if he just said the statement of Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, I would have thought it's because the Shmuel holds there is bila, right? And even though he agreed with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, his halacha, right? It's all could be taken together at the same time, but not because of the rule of yesh bila, right? He actually argues in that rule of yesh bila. That's the even proportion. Rather, he agreed because it all took. It all became a pre at the same time. That's when you can gather it all on the threshing floor and take ma'aser from it. This is having mishum do yesh bila. So kamash bon. Therefore, he has to make the second statement of lakol ein bila that there is no bila. V'yashmi'inan lakol ein bila. If I would have thought that there is no bila, havamina karabanan svile, I would have held they hold like the rabbanan, right? That in case of pula mitzri, right? That you can't go ahead and take meiser for them all together. So therefore, that you could take meiser and tribus meiser from them all together but not for the reason because they all became a pre afterwards. And if I would have had just those two, I would have thought it was a kasha, right? Because one case he says who held it there is bila, and then he says like the rabbanan that there is no bila, right? Except for the liquids, right? So kamash lo nakol gemar pri. Therefore, he says the other statement that it goes after gemar pri really does not hold this concept of bila, right? But he holds that because of the reason is the gemar pri. And if it was thought. As the case that goes after Gemar Pri Havamina Afilo Tzvua V'Zeisim Nami. I would have thought that everything goes after even grains or olives. Also, is even when they become a Gemar Pri when they finish growing as a fruit. So Kamash B'Lo and Halach Rabbi Shimon Zuri. So the Halach Zuri that come before, right? And therefore, so we say in that case. So therefore, the Halach is not like them in that case. The Kamash B'Lo Rabbi Shimon Zuri. So my fligi, and therefore, in the cases where he argues, right? In the case of over there by Polamitzri, and other case of Kidyos. Well, the Shemina Hard you want to teach these two cases that the halacha is like Shimon Shazuri, and also that you go after when it becomes a fruit. So why need to say there is no concept of bila at all, right? You don't need that. So Kamash Malan, Delayan Shemen V'yesh Bila. No, it comes teaches that there is Bila at one case, then it comes to liquids. When it comes to wine or oil or the like, those items there is Bila, there is proportion, and therefore you can't assume the portion is the same if you take there. But when it comes to other matters, then there is no Bila. All right, we'll stop here. Shkayach, everybody.